First of all, thank you everyone for being here. Finals are coming up, so we're going to try to be semi-chill with today's podcast. We have a very important topic today and one that I think we're all very excited to get into. Today's podcast is about bipolar types 1 and 2 and Phil's personal journey from diagnosis to treatment. Phil and the rest of us here are members of the SCSU chapter of Active Minds, which is a national nonprofit advocacy group that supports mental health education and awareness for young adults. Our goal here today is to educate ourselves and our audience and promote resources. Like I said, we're going to try to balance. We're going to give a platform to Phil to discuss his personal story, but we'll also try to focus on education and advocacy and stay light for our audience or those who might be struggling with similar issues. Active Minds has been around campus this school year at different tabling events, advertising mental health facilities such as counseling and psychological services, Healthy Huskies, and other student health services. With us today is Charlene, our faculty advisor, Alexis, our co-president, and several Gen Body members. My name is Nick, and I am the other co-president of our chapter. We meet every Wednesday at 3:30 in the Columbine Room on the second floor of Atwood. And as always, we are looking for new members. As we start to wrap up this school year, we're going to have several leadership opportunities and positions open in the fall. So if you are interested in mental health awareness, we would love for you to come by and sit down for a meeting, or please feel free to contact us at activeminds@stcloudstate.edu with any questions about the club. All right, so as a brief overview, bipolar disorder is a mental health condition that causes mood swings into emotional highs, called mania or hypomania, and lows, also called depression. Hypomanic episodes cause less noticeable deviations from regular outward actions than mania, but both types of episodes can produce agitation, overwhelming confidence, racing thoughts, and risk-taking activities. A major depressive episode is an emotional episode that can cause loss of interest in activities, fatigue, guilt, inability to concentrate, and self-deprecating thoughts. Type 1 bipolar disorder is a condition that causes you to have at least one manic episode, which is then either preceded or followed by hypomanic or major depressive episodes. Type 2 bipolar disorder involves having at least one hypomanic and major depressive episode, but never a manic episode. The biggest challenge facing diagnosis is that the disorder is most prominent in teens and young adults, both of which are often facing constant stress. Because of this, it can be hard to gauge the severity of the ups and downs you experience, especially because we often have a hard time gauging our own emotional stability or instability until something drastic and physical happens. The main thing to emphasize up top is that if you are experiencing any combination of these symptoms, or if any part of our discussion today speaks particularly to your experience, we ask that you please consult either a doctor, professional, or advisor so you can start receiving the treatment you need. The earlier you can receive treatment, the easier it will be to manage and treat the symptoms. And as always, we will have links to the resources we discussed today posted in the description of the podcast. All right, so as we discussed earlier, today we're talking about Phil's personal experience with bipolar disorder and the details of that journey that aren't often explained or represented. First, before we jump into the questions, we'll just have you introduce yourself and how you got involved with Active Minds.
All right, thank you, Nick. Hi, everyone. My name is Phil Jansen. I'm 24 years old. I'm a community psychology major here at SCSU. I'm actually a transfer student, and it should only take me 2 years to get my degree, so I guess I'm a junior, but this is my first year at St. Cloud State. I believe I was introduced to Active Minds the first couple of weeks in January at the beginning of this semester. I actually had an assignment for one of my classes to go look on Huskies Connect, and so I saw Active Minds had an event, or it had a meeting for the group, so that's how I found out about Active Minds. And recently, during the Hey You OK week, I tabled for soda and self-care at Atwood Memorial Center.
All right, so the first thing we're going to ask you about is your path to treatment. And Alexis will start us off with our first question.
Philip, I'm wondering what events led up to your diagnosis and you getting help.
So I have a lot to say about this, but I just want to give a brief trigger warning that it does get kind of dark, so I want people to be mentally prepared for that or not listen if they choose not to. But I'll just start the very beginning. I don't remember being symptomatic as a child per se, but I would say that in middle school and high school, so as a teen and older, I definitely had anxiety and depression. And although this is just speculation, I think it's possible I had bipolar that early on in life, which could have been the cause of those symptoms. I'm not 100% sure. But one detail, I was a theater kid. I acted in plays and stuff. And that's a pretty high energy activity. So I'm thinking that could have masked hypomania at that time. Once again, I'm not sure, so it's a little bit of a mystery. I wasn't diagnosed at that point. I would say the bipolar gradually became more evident, though, in young adulthood, so in my 20s. In the summer of 2019, I was living with my godparents, my aunt and uncle, in New Hope, Minnesota. And I had a job. My job at the time, I was driving around in a van and fixing appliances. It was a really stressful job for me. It was kind of stretching my capabilities, pushing them to the limit. I wasn't like naturally good at it, so I kind of had a rough time with it. But yeah, the job was not a particularly good fit. And I also knew my mental health was sort of starting to deteriorate at that time. So that is when I really seriously sought out therapy. So yeah, I had seen some therapists in the past for like depression and anxiety, but what I hadn't found was a more long-term and transformational relationship. And so that was the beginning of my relationship with my current therapist when I had this job fixing appliances. That's when I first met the therapist who I'm still working with to this day. And okay, so at that point in time, bipolar was still not diagnosed or identified as an issue for me, but I now know it must have been present then. I really think at that point I had hypomanic and depressed moods. I think it was fair to say I had them at that point, but they still weren't, I guess, as obvious as they could be. Fast forward to summer of 2020, and that is when I think my bipolar became the most obvious, I'd say. I went back to living with my parents, and I also had a job in Duluth, and actually traveled all around the state into Wisconsin as well. And the job, it was calibrating X-ray equipment and also setting up the equipment and tearing it down, stuff like that. And that summer, the summer of 2020, my insomnia became really bad. So I was having really bad insomnia. And I was driving all over, but I probably shouldn't have been driving, but I did for my work, going to various clinics like animal hospitals and things like that. And so around this period, I was desperately trying to get treatment for my insomnia. And I went to the ER a couple of times, but nothing seemed to be working. I was not treating it. It was just kind of staying really bad. And soon enough, I was deep into probably my worst ever occurrence of hypomania and depression. I'd say sometimes they manifested as separate episodes, but other times they were mixed together, I would say. And experiencing hypomania and depression almost simultaneously, I would say was extremely impairing. Just to give a more of an example of this, the symptoms I had kind of culminated with me sort of randomly on a whim driving to the Pine County Courthouse in Pine City. I threw my cell phone in a pond. I was considering running away from home and becoming a missing person, but I didn't do that. And for some reason I can't explain, I guess I was just chasing pain to feel anything at that point. I dragged myself through a sewer. Well, actually, it wasn't a sewer. It was some kind of a tunnel with water and sand in it, like a water line, I guess. And so I drug myself through there. I don't know why. So it was kind of a bit of a self-harm experience, I guess. But after that, I drove back home. And later on, I don't know if it was the next morning or later on in the week, I exploded at my parents. I was delusional. I was accusing them of murder and stuff. partly because I guess I wanted to get revenge at them, or I had held grudges. I was holding in anger at them. Basically, I wanted to anger them. But the reason I was delusional is because I thought that if I believed they were murderers hard enough, it might come true. It's kind of a weird distinction to make, but I thought I could cause it to happen. I didn't necessarily believe they truly were, but I thought I could cause it. So just kind of a weird distinction to make there, but hopefully it makes a little bit of sense. So a lot of my suffering came from the fact that I couldn't just change reality like the flip of a switch to whatever I was thinking. So anyway, as I was yelling at my parents in the morning and being hostile, I remember my dad calling someone on the phone who I thought was a psychologist, but I'm not really sure. The memories are a little blurry. And somehow, somewhere along the line, a diagnosis of schizophreniform was slapped on me by someone, I don't know, someone presumably with a degree, I guess. But this diagnosis didn't make any sense to me or my therapist. I wasn't having auditory or visual hallucinations, and there's no evidence that I ever had. And so later, this led him to diagnosing me with bipolar 2, which he thought was a diagnosis that fit my symptoms a lot better. Anyway, because I was so out of control, I got sent to Mercy Hospital Unity campus in Fridley, Minnesota, and I stayed there for about the whole month of August. So it was an inpatient stay and trying to get the symptoms more under control, I'd say. So some days at the hospital, I would be freaking out, and they had to like restrain me and put me in solitary confinement and give me a shot of something to calm me down. But eventually I kind of started to mellow out and just follow their instructions and try to let them help me. But I thought the treatment and the meds they were giving me were for the wrong disorder. So that kind of lended to me not wanting to take the medication. But later I realized that those same medications they were giving me treated bipolar as well. I didn't know that at the time, but later I figured that out. And the good thing though about it was a really hard experience, I would say, being in that hospital with all these other people with severe mental illness. But the bright side of that was the meds were actually helping me sleep, and which sort of solved the insomnia issue. And I was still unhappy at the time, but nonetheless, I was a bit more stable. So fast forwarding again to January 2021, I started taking college classes again through Lake Superior College. And soon I started an overnight care assistant job at an assisted living facility in Sandstone, Minnesota, which was kind of weird because it was an overnight job. So I was sleeping through the morning and I was awake all night, which probably wasn't ideal for having bipolar disorder. And I think my psychiatrist told me too, like, you should try to get a day job. So during this period, I, for some stupid reason, I stopped taking my meds. I'm not sure why, but I have heard that's something that people with bipolar frequently struggle with. So I remember when I was off meds, I got pissed off and I went out to the barn, my parents' barn, and I smashed an old TV because I was so angry. And then after that, I realized how symptomatic I was, and soon I got back on the meds, and I haven't gone off since. Anyway, so as I sort of previously mentioned, the next step for me was getting back to a normal day shift job, which I did, and I'm still doing that now. It's medical billing with a company, and soon enough, I was living here in St. Cloud and going to college. I should add that my most recent psychological assessment or testing was done at St. Cloud Neurobehavioral Associates. So that's a local place. And they said at the time of my hospitalization, I believe they said I had acute psychosis. And later I learned that psychosis can go hand in hand with bipolar and sleep deprivation. So it's kind of unclear what could cause what, but it seemed like all these things were related. But as far as seeing things or hearing voices, that stuff never really manifested for me. And that's why my psychiatrist will say they're treating me for bipolar disorder, not something schizophrenia related. So sorry, that was kind of a lot more information than I suspected, but it gives a very in-depth introduction to my symptoms and kind of my journey up to the current day.
No, I think it's really important to emphasize that people who experience bipolar, often that coincides with other conditions and disorders. And that is something very important to emphasize as it was a huge part of your journey. So I think that's really important that we emphasize that today as well.
It's kind of weird, but I know I have anxiety. Whether that anxiety is a result of the bipolar or whether it's more comorbid, just existing at the same time, I guess I don't really know the answer to that question.
And with a lot of bipolar people or people with any mental health condition, that initial period of diagnosis and jumping into treatment can be one of the most challenging parts of the journey. We kind of wanted to touch on that today as well and talk about the parts of your journey that have required a little extra strength to power through. Anil has our next question regarding that.
What has been the biggest challenge living with these conditions, or specifically with bipolar conditions?
So I would say I don't have too many challenges right now, but now that I don't have insomnia, I do actually have a bit of a tendency to sleep in, so possibly a bit of hypersomnia, but it's something I've learned to live with, and it's much more manageable than the intense insomnia I was having before. I would say still something that's a bit of a current challenge is that occasionally I still have suicidal thoughts. The meds I'm on don't really make that go away. But I would say usually I just wait for maybe 5 minutes or something, and then I'm fine. They're kind of fleeting thoughts. I don't usually get totally bombarded, I would say. Another challenge is sometimes I feel a little bit hypomanic or a little bit depressed, but usually those symptoms are much less severe than they would be if I was off medication. They would be much more severe. So they're much more manageable overall. But when I was not medicated, I would say I had a lot more challenges. For one, sort of an unconventional form of self-harm. So I kind of wanted the natural world to assault me. I jumped in a nasty pond, and I remember I got a rash from that. And once when I was really agitated, I got really angry and hostile, and then I walked for miles in the hot sun and got sunburned really bad just because I was pissed off, I guess. So yeah, not necessarily self-harm in a way that we generally think of it, but nonetheless, I thought I deserved unpleasant experiences. And I would just take a lot of weird risks and try to put myself in harm's way. I think that's why I was hanging around the Pine County police station, because I wanted someone to arrest me or shoot me or something like that. So in a way, I thought the more poorly I treated myself, the more the world would reward me. So committing suicide, I thought would be the ultimate act, but I was too scared to do it. And I never planned. Mostly I just had thoughts why not open the car door and jump out? So kind of impulsive, which is still really rough to go through, but I also do feel lucky I never went through with it. So one last final point on challenges. The mixed episodes were really challenging. It's very hard to describe what that was like, but a phrase I figured out to try to explain it was I was euphoric about being depressed, which sounds like a contradiction in a way, but that's the best way I can describe it. It felt like I should welcome the worst with excitement.
In addition to the personal challenges, a lot of people with conditions like bipolar receive a whole new level of awareness of the misunderstandings and stigma that people outside of the issue have. We'll turn it over to London with our next question.
Phil, I was just wondering what misunderstandings or stigma you've noticed around the discussion of bipolar 2 disorder.
So yeah, bipolar 2. I guess I really haven't experienced a whole lot of judgment, but I do have a couple things to say on this. I think I haven't received a lot of judgment because of how recently a lot of this stuff unfolded. A lot of people don't know that I have bipolar 2. I think friends and family do, but not everyone. So for the most part, they've been understanding. As far as misunderstandings in general, I felt pretty hurt when people were believing this schizophreniform diagnosis because it felt like people just wanted to see me as crazy in a way because it was convenient for them, when really my most overwhelming symptoms were unmanageable moods. But briefly, I will touch something more on topic. I think there is a stereotype out there that bipolar is hot and cold or kind of like these swift mood shifts. And I would say maybe I've experienced a little bit of that, but I've rarely experienced that overall. I think the moods with bipolar 2 are more gradual and long lasting, and they can sort of sneak up on you in a way.
Yeah. And just to kind of talk on the opposite of that, what avenues and opportunities have you had to feel represented or heard? Where have you seen the discussion of the condition handled properly, and what did that look like?
Well, I guess what I'm doing right now is a huge one. I don't know if that counts, but just the idea to kind of control my own narrative, to explain these things to people. Because at the time, when I was basically impaired, I wasn't in a right state of mind. I did a lot of things I regret. I think I hurt people, but it wasn't necessarily intentional. It was a result of what I was going through. So this is a huge opportunity right here, this podcast, for me to kind of represent myself, I guess, and be a voice for myself. So that's the most healing thing for me right now. As far as some other things in the past, there's actually a movie out there called The Silver Linings Playbook. It was a 2012 movie starring Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence, which I personally thought did a really good job of portraying bipolar disorder. And I actually wrote a paper on this movie for one of my classes at Lake Superior College. I identified a lot with the main character, who was named Pat. And even though I would venture to say that he had bipolar 1, not bipolar 2, but it's a little bit ambiguous. He could have had either one, probably. And I don't really want to give away the plot of the movie, but I just definitely recommend it. It's one, I'd say it did better than a lot of movies would do on mental health. It seemed to capture a lot of the nuance. And I'm not going to say it was perfect, but I think they did a pretty good job.
Yeah, and just to go back to like misrepresentation, I think one of the biggest platforms for that is media. Just like movies and TV shows, I think, are often some of the biggest perpetrators of the like romanticization of bipolar, like that hot and cold you were talking about.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I think accurate media representation is one of the most important things we can do now to try to change that. And that takes the form of like movies and TV shows that handle it with a little bit more respect. And I think that takes form in podcasts like this, where we can just have an open, like human discussion about it instead of inflating it to, make it fit a story better or whatever. But yeah, just moving on from that, we wanted to talk about when people are approaching or even in a moment of crisis, that often requires a special level of focus and attention to properly manage. Alexis's next question should help us dive into that.
Yeah, Phil, I was wondering what coping skills you have found the most helpful in managing some of the symptoms from your episodes.
So a lot of times when even if I didn't feel like I was in crisis, I would call like text lines and stuff. I think like Text for Life was one, or maybe it wasn't called that exactly, but there's a lot of numbers out there that you can do. So if I was just feeling a bit depressed or a bit hypomanic, I might just chat with someone anonymously. And it kind of helps just to know someone else is there, even from a more distanced, even though they're not right there next to you, they can still hear your thoughts, still hear your feelings. So I mean, I haven't utilized that as much recently, but it is something I've found to be a helpful experience in the past. Is for managing symptoms. I would say for the brief encounters I have with suicidal thoughts, mindfulness helps a lot. I kind of just let the thoughts come and go freely, and they eventually go away on their own. If I try to fight it, if I say, don't think that, it usually just makes the cycle worse, and I fixate more on it. So I kind of try not to make a judgment and maybe just distract myself a little bit or remind myself that this is a temporary experience. Another technique I learned from my therapist was a 4-7-8 breathing exercise. You inhale for 4, hold the breath for 7, and exhale for 8. Just 4-7-8 seconds, I guess. And that's something I still utilize. Like if I'm feeling really stressed, it kind of helps calm me down. Another thing that has been with me like from the beginning, since I was just a baby pretty much, is music. I'd say music has always provided like an escape for me, but it's also grounded me in reality as well. Have just going through the creative process and being able to express different emotions and things. It's helped me cope with moods for as long as I can remember. And even when I was going through the worst of my bipolar and the episodes and so forth, I was still making music. And I just want to quick say you can hear some of that music at phillament.com. That's PHILLAMINT.com. If you guys are interested in hearing some of my music. One more thing, my faith in God and Jesus has helped me immensely, my spirituality. It's helped me to find meaning in life overall, and also it helps combat some of the existential anguish I've experienced, I'd say. I think that's what I got for managing symptoms.
Yeah, and for our listeners, as Phil said, Minnesota does have a 24-hour crisis text line that anyone can access. All you have to do is text MN to 741-741 to be connected to the text line if you are struggling. And to bloom that out further, we also wanted to talk about what can be done in the day-to-day to manage the condition. And Anil's question should speak to that.
Okay. What lifestyle decisions have helped you improve your everyday life?
Yeah, I personally feel there's a little bit of overlap with this and the managing symptoms, so I might just be repeating myself a little bit, but like the mindfulness, that's really helpful. I should probably do more of that. I'm considering like joining a meditation group or yoga because I have found that helpful in the past. Like when I was actually going to college in Coquet once, Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College. They had a yoga class, and I just remembered finding that to be a very healing experience. So it's something I'm not doing currently, but I want to get back into. Also, I guess I'll just briefly touch on diet. I guess my current diet is nothing to write home about. It's not great. It's kind of just the American diet, but something I strive to do more is just always include more vegetables and like fish into my diet because I feel more capable and ready to face the challenges of the day when I try to make better dietary decisions, I guess. And yeah, I guess I'll just reiterate, like making music, it's definitely a spiritual experience for me. It's something that helps me feel connected to a higher power. I honestly, if I didn't have music, I don't know what I'd be doing here. At the end of the day, it's always been so central to everything I do in my life. Yeah, I'd really be intrigued at hearing some other people with bipolar, what their self-care methods are. Mine are far from perfect. Some days I just go and take a hot shower and just try to relax that way, you know. It's not the worst coping mechanism in the world. It doesn't solve everything, but sometimes good is just good enough, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's important to emphasize here that no path to recovery is the same, and that anyone battling with the condition will not have the same journey. Complications and deviations arise, And it's important to highlight the fact that that is often a natural part of the path to recovery. So, as well as what has worked, we also wanted to touch on possible complications that can arise when you're pursuing mental health resources. London's next question should help us elaborate on that process.
Yeah, Phil, kind of touching on your last point, have you found any lifestyle or self-care methods that are less effective than others? And then when you find one that doesn't work as well as you thought it would, how do you respond and adapt to that?
This is a very good question, but I'm afraid I'm not super prepared to answer it, but I'll try my best. So yeah, like I used to like just try making myself even more anxious when I was anxious, but that doesn't really work very well. Like I would seek out things that made me anxious. So like when I was doing mechanical work and trying to fix things, it was because I wanted to stretch myself to the limit to see what my capabilities were, which in a way it's good to be explorative, I think. I don't totally regret that stuff, but you don't want to do something that's always going to stress you out. You want to pursue a career or pursue a vocation or a calling that at the end of the day you feel good about, and that the good parts outweigh the bad parts, I'd say. Remind me again of like the overall theme of this question, self-care, right? What hasn't worked?
Yeah, just kind of wondering what self-care methods haven't worked as well for you. And then when you find one that doesn't work as well, how do you kind of bounce back from that?
A lot of it is just try and try again. If one thing doesn't work, switch it up and try something else. If it's never worked, just avoid it like the plague, I guess. There's some really bad ones out there, but yeah, it's definitely a very fluid process. Not any one day is the same. Some of it is just you got to go with the flow and deal with the punches as they come or whatever.
Phil, Charlene here. I just want to
Yeah.
piggyback on that question. I know for me in my practice here at the Counseling Center, working with students with that same diagnosis, sometimes one of the things that they tend to do for coping that does not work is get into chemicals or alcohol, excessive use or addiction. Any of that for you that's been a challenge for you that you've come to realize that it's not necessarily the best lifestyle or coping strategy to manage your symptoms?
Yeah, for like, I don't know, maybe half a year I smoked cigarettes, but that was a long time ago. I don't remember exactly how old I was or when I did that, but I don't now. But the temptation is still there. On some level, I would consider myself an addict in recovery.
Thank you.
And beyond the changes in lifestyle, it is also crucial to reemphasize that anyone who is struggling pursues professional help. As with all conditions, treatment is a journey, and there are people who can help pave that path. We talked about this a lot up top, but as a final wrap-up question, how have medication and therapy been most influential in your journey?
Yeah, so therapy, if you ever decide to go therapy in your life, and it's a good therapist, because not every therapist is good, it has to be a good match. And you want them to see your blind spots and make you aware of things you wouldn't otherwise be aware of, and kind of bring a lot of those unconscious things to be more conscious. And when you become more aware, you can start to change your behaviors, and it starts kind of snowballing, and it starts affecting everything in your life. It will change your life, in my opinion, even if you don't need a therapist like every week. Like right now, I'm going every other week, I believe. I used to go every week, but that's another thing. The goal of therapy is sometimes that you can become more self-healing and then need the therapy less. I would say one of the goals of therapy is to decrease your therapy over time. I think you're still going to need a therapist a lot of the time, but it might be once a month instead of every other week or something like that. So yeah, therapy is super important. I'd recommend it to anyone, even if you feel like you're dealing with things well or super mentally healthy. There's things you're probably not aware of. That a sort of impartial perspective can you can gain a lot of insight into your personality and how to live better and how to be happy. And so that's a bit on therapy. As far as medications, I'm taking 50 milligrams of lamotrigine and 5 milligrams of olanzapine every morning. I also take 7.5 milligrams of olanzapine at night. So that's my regimen. I just take those every day. They do make me a bit sleepy, but it's something I've just learned to live with. But yeah, if anyone else with bipolar or mental illness, you'll know if you need meds because, at least for me, I know that I need them, because if I didn't have them, my episodes would just be so much worse and I would spiral out of control. I think that just proved itself over time and over my lack of commitment to it. And eventually when I did commit, I realized I should have never went off of these.
Yeah, and as we stated up top, one of the main things we want to do here today is to make students aware of the resources available to them. We will have the Minnesota Crisis text line in the description of this podcast. In addition, the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, or DBSA, is a national organization that hosts wellness-oriented support groups, either online or in person. They offer specialized groups for young adults, veterans, people of color, and people struggling with both substance use and mood disorders. A link to their website will be posted below. They also provide resources for family and friends of those that are struggling. On campus, we have counseling and psychological services available for appointments Monday through Friday at Eastman Hall 305 between 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. You can make an appointment through either the link in the description or by calling 320-308-3171. If you need to reach out at a different time, you can reach the St. Cloud 24-hour crisis line at 320-253-5555. or the Central Minnesota Mental Health Center crisis line at 1-800-635-8008.
Phil, I guess I have one. Charlene here again. Again, a lot of my experience with students very similar to your story. There is a level of acceptance that eventually needs to happen when we, oftentimes those with this early diagnosis and treatment and symptoms, there's the medication is not always easy to take. There's a lifestyle change. There's a loss that goes along with sometimes this diagnosis, because there's some adaptations that have to happen, and sometimes it's just it's a disorder that can take over, and that treatment, mental health treatment and medication and self-care all are part of that treatment, but that's a lot of effort, and that creates some significant changes for someone who needs to make some adaptations. And so oftentimes those individuals go off their medication, they stop their treatment, and they say, I don't need this anymore, I don't want this anymore, and then oftentimes find themselves back to or having extensive symptoms that were even greater than the ones that they started with. So I'm curious, have you gone through that kind of understandable dilemma and struggle within yourself about accepting the diagnosis and treatment?
Yeah, I think at first I probably didn't want to expect it, and that's also somewhat due to the fact that I probably was hypomanic or depressed at that time. So, and I didn't want to accept that as a problem. I kind of blamed other people, blamed the world, blame anything, but that this is just an unfortunate thing that I happen to have, So you could really kind of misdirect a lot of your anger. You could misdirect a lot of your feelings and displace them onto people. So I just want to take a moment to apologize to anyone who I hurt as a result of my bipolar, because it's definitely something that happens and I think it needs to be talked about. But I'm probably still in a process of accepting it. Sometimes it's hard to accept because it's like when you're on meds, you're like, what? How did I ever even have a problem? That means they're working. That means it's good, I guess. Because now, I experience a lot of joy in life, and it's not the terrible thing I made it out to be. A lot of that was my choices, and also a lot of that was being untreated with not having medication. Medication has been a huge success, I would say, for me. And so yeah, I kind of just came to accept it because I saw the results in my life. I was like, I'm a much nicer person to be around when I follow this regimen or when I take this advice, and I succeed in my classes. I am more secure socially, and it just it has a multitude of effects that I can't really adequately emphasize them all in this short period of time. You'd kind of have to be in my shoes, and you can't be, but yeah, so it took a long time to accept it, but I think doing this podcast is just another thing that adds to the acceptance of my mental health being what it is.
Thank you.
And one last thing I wanted to ask was, with the space you're in right now and the experience you've had, what's a piece of advice you would give your younger self before treatment that you wish you would have had?
Wow, that is a really deep question. Oh, I would say, be kind to yourself. You don't deserve poor treatment. You might think that you do, but it's not a reflection of reality. You don't need to seek out bad experiences. You can experience joy. You can experience the good sides of life as well. And although you can't necessarily change bad things when you come, you can change how you respond to them, respond to certain challenges, and try to approach things with a level head and a kind heart, and try your best. Even when it feels like you're failing, just keep trying your best. And yeah, you can experience a lot of good things in life that way. I wish I would have told my younger self that. And I wish I had heard those affirmations from other people as well more, because if I did, maybe I would have sought out treatment sooner. I'm not sure. Also, that same advice can apply to adolescents or anyone else now who may or may not be struggling with bipolar. They might need to hear that too. So in addition to for my younger self, I just want to say to people with mental illness in general, I would give that advice.
All right. So yeah, as I said at the start of our conversation today, Active Minds is always looking for more people passionate about mental health. So if any part of our discussion today interested you and you want to sit in for a meeting, feel free to stop by the Columbine room on Wednesdays at 3:30. We have more information on our Huskies Connect page and Facebook page, and we can be reached at activeminds@stcloudstate.edu. And as I said, all of the resources we discussed today will be posted in the description of the podcast.